Welcome to Leaders' Questions.
Taoiseach, we've now had over a decade of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael presiding over a housing emergency. And now you propose to force ripped-off renters to carry the can for your failures. Your plan for the private rental sector is really Fianna Fáil's rent hike bill. And you can spoof all you want. The only certainty from your move is that rent is going to increase for every renter. It's only a question of when. We know that the average length of a tenancy is 3.5 years, and many are much shorter. So the impact of your plan will be felt very quickly. All renters will be subject to big hikes over time. Those moving into new build properties will be hit with massive market rent from day one, while those who move frequently for work and education and regularly enter new tenancies will be absolutely hammered. We're talking about construction workers, healthcare workers in training, students who already struggle to find affordable accommodation fleeced over and over. Fianna Fáil's rent hike bill is a bonanza for the big property funds, the vultures, for the corporate landlords, a blueprint to boost the profit of the big boys and to screw over renters. That's your plan. And you do this during a persistent cost of living crisis when people are hit with price hikes right across the board. Over the last 4 years, the cost of the weekly shop has skyrocketed by €3,000 a year for many, many families. On average, renters are forking out an additional €7,000 a year on rent. So where do you think, Taoiseach, that people get the money? Everything within your back-of-an-envelope plan is a jumble of contradictions, the product of a panicked government at sixes and sevens, desperately seeking to defend a plan that more resembles a last throw of the dice gamble rather than an actual solution. It's been blunder after blunder. You had to change the press statement announcing your plan because you made such a mess of things. You said one thing, the minister said another thing. The left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. And nowhere in the announcement on Tuesday or in the days that followed was any mention made of government immediately bringing forward legislation to extend rent pressure zones to the entire state. You are content to wait until March and expose renters to big hikes. But by Thursday, lo and behold, you changed your story. And you are adamant that it was always your intention to bring forward that legislation. Taoiseach, pull the other one. You're only doing it now because you were called out. Taoiseach, such is the mess now that we have government TDs briefing against the housing minister, in their words, for producing a plan that he can't explain and that they can't understand. Well, I'm happy to explain it to them. This is Fianna Fáil's plan to hike up rents. That's it. That's the bottom line. Kintian bill in a fall conchisha ardu gorakian kisses orda the gokishor ni urin och phonics ni feather lanunt le show. Taoiseach, the only way to undo the damage is to go back to the drawing board. By all means, extend rent pressure zones to the rest of the state, areas that should never have been left out in the first place, by the way. But you have to drop the rest of the Fianna Fáil rent hike bill. It's a crazy plan and renters simply cannot take any more.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
First of all, Deputy, I reject completely your assertions. I think you're guilty of severe exaggerated commentary in respect of the reform of the rent pressure zones announced last week. And the bottom line is, as a result of those reforms, renters will have stronger protections than ever before. And all renters will be covered by rent pressure zones. And it will be interesting, of course, that the very first item on the agenda of our rent pressure reforms will be something that you have no choice but to support. So despite all the bluster, all the hype, you will go into the voting lobbies to support the very first measure of the reform package that we announced last week. And it's interesting, you know, Michael Byrne, who was a lecturer in political economy at the School of Social Policy, Social Work and Social Justice and UCDN works with Threshold, he has said that the security of tenure measures announced last week are really significant. And I quote, "Arguably, they are among the most robust protection for tenants in Europe." I'm not saying that. No one on the government side is saying it. It's someone who's been involved in the area for quite some time. And that is the case, because we have an effective end to no-fault evictions where the landlord has 4 or more tenancies. New tenancies will now be guaranteed for 6 years. Tenancies with smaller landlords generally have a minimum duration of 6 years, and with limited circumstances, more limited than before, smaller tenancies can end. And I look forward to you either opposing those measures, surely you'll have to vote for them, for the additional protections we're going to bring forward. And what will happen is the contrast between your hype and your hyperbole, contrasting that with what will happen when we put these legislative pieces through the House, will be a yawning gap, because you simply surely will have to vote for these additional protections. But the more fundamental point is this. You have proposed a rent freeze for 3 years. That would damage supply. Overall, your objective is to reduce the rental market. That's your overall policy objective as a party. You have an ideological hostility to the rental market and to the private market more generally in terms of construction. The freeze on rent increases would mean no one could claim for maintenance costs or even the cost of inflation. And who is going to invest in new units with Sinn Féin's policy? Because your solutions simply are wrong. And your whole proposition is incoherent. Because the only way we can deal with the housing crisis is to dramatically increase supply. We have increased it from 2020 onwards to about 30-odd thousand a year. We had up to then 20,000 a year. So it's now gone to 30-odd thousand. We want to get to 50,000 a year. We need both public investment, which we're doing. The state is the largest investor in the housing market at the moment. And we need substantial private sector investment as well. And I think the Sinn Féin party has to acknowledge that. And I know you've been out protesting and you're saying this is an emergency and so on like that, which it is, I think it's a crisis. We need to deal with it societally. But it does beg the question, though, Deputy, as to how you as a Deputy could oppose to date up to 1,700 housing units in your own area. Clonliff College, 1,700 units, and Cabra likewise. Now, if you're saying it's an emergency across the country, how come it's not an emergency in your constituency or in the areas where you object? You can't have it both ways. You simply cannot have it both ways. And this kind of approach, this duplicitous approach, in my view, to housing has to end. And what we need from you are concrete solutions as to how you increase supply so that we can get to a situation where we can be building 50,000 a year.
Please.
So, Taoiseach, it might interest you to know that far from having an ideological objection to rental accommodation, I was actually raised in rental accommodation. Imagine that. So I have no ideological. As a matter of fact, I'm absolutely determined that renters, whether they're long-term renters, as is the case for my family, or shorter-term renters, which is the more normal experience, that they are not fleeced and gouged in the way that is currently happening. I mean, I don't know how blunt or clear we have to be with you, but renters now pay thousands of euros more than just a few short years ago. And all of the additional costs in a cost of living crisis. So you can stand up and bluster and cast aspersions at me all you like. You're in government. You are the Taoiseach. It is your housing minister that is proposing a bill that will have one effect, one definite effect, and that is higher rents for renters. And I am appealing to you, don't do that. Renters have had enough. Have some decency and some consideration for people who are struggling.
Deputy, I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking about the Sinn Féin party. And the Sinn Féin party's policy objective over time is to reduce the size of the private rental sector. And if you look at your policies over the last number of years, it's been designed to suppress supply. in the private rental market. And you've argued then for a tripling. We've built more social houses in the last 4 years than has been built since 1975. 36,500 new social houses built. In 2023, 12,000 social houses delivered and 10,500 delivered last year. These are record numbers of social housing delivered. You're saying overnight you can do that, you can go to 30,000 overnight, and you have not outlined how you would get to 30,000 overnight. And the measures proposed last week and the reforms will cap rent for all existing tenants to 2%. You know that. And in terms of any new tenants, post-2026 will be at CPI.
Deputy Ivana Bacci of the Labour Party. Deputy
Like, share, and subscribe to stay informed and help drive positive change.